something, but I'm changing it a little bit
No problem.
to kind of build on the conversations that we've already been having. Thank you so much, first of all, for the space to share my testimony with you all. My name is Jasmine Wali. I am the Director of Parent Advocacy and Legislative Priorities at JMacForFamilies. Existing efforts to reform the child welfare system are not enough. To reduce racial disparities in the child welfare system, the ways that families enter surveillance of the Administration for Children's Services, or ACS, must also change. We must end malicious reporting and harassment through anonymous reporting by instituting a policy of confidential reporting. We must also inform parents of their Miranda rights at the first point of contact. But I would really like to expand more on the previous conversation. The Family First Prevention Services Act of 2018, also known as Family First, is celebrated as the future of the child welfare system by some, making notable reforms to child welfare financing by giving states the ability to receive federal Title IV-E funds to conduct preventive services. However, to parents that I work with at JMacForFamilies, these preventive services are yet another form of surveillance funded by a system that has caused the painful separation of their families. New York State's Office of Children and Family Services, or OCFS, is tasked with overseeing and dispersing federal Family First funding. All social service providers who work at OCFS and at nonprofits that receive funding by OCFS are mandated reporters. Implicit biases in the reporting process is no secret. I believe the Deputy Commissioner mentioned it.
Yep.
The federal and New York government have each developed resources and training sessions aimed at reducing implicit biases among social service providers. Implicit biases are not learned in one day. Similarly, they cannot be unlearned in one day or over the course of several trainings. Notable roles who serve as mandated reporters include licensed therapists, mental health professionals at OCFS-funded organizations, substance abuse and alcoholism counselors, employees of publicly funded emergency shelters for families with children,
Homeless shelters?
at publicly funded emergency shelters, yes,
The entire workforce of the shelter system, which is huge, are mandated reporters?
yes.
Okay.
And some employees who provide home and community-based services, I believe under Social Security Section 1115. Certain programs under that section. For families in poverty, the amount of surveillance in places like their current residences or community-based health services has already increased beyond other families. Parents experiencing hardships like domestic violence or substance abuse know that these preventive services funded by Family First are mandated to report under vague definitions of child abuse or neglect.
I'm sorry, just so we're clear, report to ACS?
Report to ACS.
Yeah.
Parents at JMacForFamilies who have previously been investigated by ACS are particularly wary of these preventive services. Parents who come to JMacForFamilies feel that rather than being there to support a family, preventive services are there now to surveil their family and build a case against them for ACS. Parents that I speak to. Many mothers in DV situations who have been previously impacted by the child welfare system share the sentiment that, and I quote, "I would rather just take the beating than to have ACS knock at my door." The trauma that these women have endured from ACS, separating their family, and the fight that it took to get their children back, to them, outweighs the trauma that they may endure at home. And I noticed that the OCFS recently implemented a Safe and Together model to address domestic violence in child welfare. I looked through the model. It focuses mostly on ways to document a case, ways to have quote-unquote trauma-informed care. It is still perpetuating the cycle of mandated reporting and funded by Family First, right? So they're still mandated to report.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
I'm totally with you.
Please.
So the Family First money This is for any of the experts and for you as well. Does it have to flow through the ACS system? Why?
So
Yeah, go ahead.
it's given to OCFS to disperse to programs or.
Yeah, and OCFS makes the decision to send it to the local CPSs, including ACS, right?
Yes.
Okay. But I'm sorry, I just wanted to be clear that the
course.
federal government is not requiring that we go through and use these systems to provide preventative services. That's just a choice by New York State.
I will have to get back to you on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Please do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Additionally, the focus on preventive services and clinical interventions fails to acknowledge the role that poverty plays in child welfare system intervention. Clinical interventions will not be fully effective without resources to lessen poverty. The funding model does not tackle the larger challenge of preventing family disruption caused by poverty. The links between poverty reporting and family reunification are clear. I don't think I really need to get into that because I think we've covered it already.
Mm-hmm.
Family First's reallocation to Title IV-E funding to evidence-based clinical intervention as prevention does not account for the realities of poverty and underpaid, inflexible jobs. Employed parents navigating the child welfare system have a number of obligations to meet, including mandated services, court appearances, and visitations that are typically scheduled during the workday. Missing these child welfare appointments, even for work, can count as a strike or leave a bad impression and hurt chances of reunification.
Or you lose your job.
Right. Rather than provide concrete support, preventive services create an environment of increased tasks, appointments, and constant surveillance. It is hard for a parent to keep a job and have an open child welfare case. In fact, several parents today from JMacForFamilies and that I work with at JMacForFamilies have experienced losing housing and or employment after ACS separated their families. This makes it even harder for families to reunify. A parent I recently spoke to summed it up very eloquently. If you don't live it, if this is not your life, you don't understand how these mandates and laws look in action. The realities of Family First can feel like an added surveillance by a system that perpetuates a culture of over-reporting, not over-supporting, and continue a cycle of poverty and family separation. I kind of want to get into a couple, or I have one more point to make on that note. Very few of the interventions rated as evidence-based by the Title IV-E Prevention Services Clearinghouse have been demonstrated to be effective with Black and Indigenous populations, which are overrepresented in the child welfare system.
Wait, say that again. So the money that Families First can be used for really doesn't help the communities we need them to help?
So, so there's evidence-based models that are in a prevention clearinghouse.
You have to be you have to be evidence-based to
You
get
have
to
to
the
be
clear. I'm with you.
evidence-based, yep.
Yep.
And there's very few that have been demonstrated to be effective with Black and Indigenous populations.
Can I jump in? Because we're on the same same wavelength.
Of course.
So let me start here. There will be a push for more funding. But this is going to have to be something that is considered by your organization and some of our parents and friends here. The only way that that we believe we can get it done is to do a mass infusion of money into the system that captures both programs, that are run by ACS and then new that are not. That's the only thing I can deliver. I don't want anybody to think I'm going to be able to take ACS. It's just not a possibility. It's a reality. So I understand the negatives of the ACS run system, and I appreciate that, and I'm listening. I just want to be clear and on the record. I'm not going to be able to. I won't do it, but I also don't think I would be successful if I tried to drive money out of the ACS system. I don't think I would be successful even if I wanted to. But new money that flows through a new mechanism into communities for primary prevention, we're all over it.
Okay, and I would like to go on the record and, say my opinion as well.
Please. Yeah, by the way, this is about your opinion. I'm just giving mine. Sorry.
No, I appreciate the dialogue.
That's okay. Maybe I don't have to talk to my therapist this week. Yeah. So, thank you.
But to continue, relying on exclusively funding existing evidence-based interventions without adequately testing their generalizability to minority populations may actually end up perpetuating racial disparities. To conclude on my piece about the Family First Act, Every lawmaker must contend with the underlying assumptions that a policy makes. The Family First Act operates with the underlying assumption that parents must be fixed, that they are bad parents who can learn to be better through parenting classes or through therapy. This policy assumes that parents in poverty need to change their behavior, not that communities and families need to be funded and invested in. The Family First Act perpetuates the assumption that parents in poverty are automatically guilty and have to prove their innocence in order to keep their families together. And now this is all unwritten, so I'm kind of going to move on to the solutions piece.
Before you do,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, this is going to be a long hearing, guys. I have to keep going.
Of course.
But families first specifically, so what's the recommendation? I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars drawn down from the federal government that could be going to prevention services. Are you saying we shouldn't try to go after that money? I mean, I thought that money was a great thing. And remember the primary goal, get kids out of congregate care and into, so.
Sure. Well, I think that there's, I'm not a lawmaker, so I don't know how that process would go. But I would like to share some things that have been studied and proven. So the concept of a universal child allowance is gaining traction among many anti-poverty advocates as a way to reduce child poverty and income instability. One plan proposed by a number of anti-poverty researchers suggests converting the child tax credit and child tax exemption into a universal monthly child allowance of $250 per child per month. A universal child allowance has the potential to improve health outcomes among families experiencing significant hardships. One of the oversights of the EITC and the child tax credit is that children whose parents may be economically disconnected, unable to maintain regular work, or struggle with income instability may fall through the cracks. The CTC and child tax exemption are also not designed to meet emergency needs of families with children. A universal monthly child allowance designed to complement the EITC would provide an income floor for all families with children. And a recent study by Columbia University from August 2nd actually found that converting a child tax credit to a child allowance will cost about $100 billion, but generate about $800 billion in benefits to society. Specific to New York, the Empire State Tax Credit in New York City and New York State, and expanding that to $1,000 per child for all children in New York State under 17, with the exception of very high-income families or high-income families, would cost about $2.7 billion and generate about $26.2 billion in benefits to society. In New York City alone, it would cost about $1.1 billion and generate about $9.8 billion.
Can I, and
Please.
then I'd like to let.
Please.
Yeah, okay. So here's my thought about the child tax credit. First, thank you to my federal partners for passing and the money starting to arrive, the most robust child tax credit in the history of the United States. Thank you to all of our federal partners for that. I do want to mention, we have a bill that would add to the federal child tax credit to catch all the people they didn't get, including the kids 0 to 4, and then all of the kids of undocumented families who we just left off. But we should talk more about your idea at some point in the future.
I would love to.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for being so patient.